Chaser, and today I want to talk about one of the scarier realities in recovery. Now, right off the bat, if you're new to recovery, or if you're still struggling, or if you're struggling in recovery, I don't want this to be some sort of pessimistic doom or gloom thing to discourage people. I think it's a real thing that comes to people's minds in recovery. I know it's came to my mind a lot. I know other people have talked about it, and it can be daunting and frightening, but I think it should be talked about openly and discussed honestly. And I'll also go over some positive notes, some good things to consider, but it goes a little something like this. I remember one time I was in treatment, one of the few at least. I was there, I'd been there for about a week, and another person came in, and it was an older gentleman, and he didn't look great as expected. I mean, you're not going to look like you're going to a job interview when you enter rehab, unless you don't want the job. But anyways, he looked kind of ravaged and brittle. But as he was there a little bit longer, he, physically, mentally seemed better, but he still seemed pretty despondent, and I don't know, just kind of had this discouraging attitude, which is also not super rare, but for him it seemed particularly different. And eventually he had opened up a little bit more, and he said that prior to going into this round of treatment, he had been sober for 12 years. Now, there's a lot of horror stories that are shared and passed around in treatment. I learned a lot of things I wasn't even aware of that I'm now scared of. I've just had other things that were already terrifying that are reiterated to me. But of all the things, this was particularly the most bothersome, because I've come across this too many times in kind of my journey of attempts at recovery, and just all the people I've known and people I've met. And when facing people that had long-term recovery and sober and clean time, a few years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and they relapse, there's this phrase that always pops into my mind. This chorus or this mantra that it always speaks into my mind, and it goes like this. It goes, does this shit ever end? And the answer to that is, well, no. And not to be like flippant about it, but it's like, duh, you should know this. Like, one of the first things when you just expand upon any little bit of knowledge about alcoholism and addiction is that it's incurable. You'll always be an alcoholic, or you'll always be an addict, and that's something that you gotta live with. And a lot of this, this scary idea of that could seem, again, so daunting to people, is you take on an idea of, just for today, you do it one day at a time, just don't drink today, all that type of stuff. It almost takes on a sort of carpe diem type of mentality of just live for today, try not to worry about the future. There's no point, you don't know what's going to happen with it. I mean, at least in terms of staying sober, just don't worry about the future. And, that's something that I acknowledge and I understand, but inside of me, there's this little part that's like, okay, but, I mean, after you've had some years, over 5 years, 10 years, like, you're pretty much all right? Like, I totally understand. You gotta do the things that you did to get sober, and you gotta do like your healthy habits and rituals, or whatever it is. Don't fall back into bad modes of thought. Totally understand that, but like, you're gonna be good, right? And the truth is that there's no guarantee of that, and that is I don't know. That's like causes me like an existential crisis almost, because it's like, I mean, I get it. It's something that, like, I totally understand that I'll never be able to drink normal. Got it. But like, just the thought that even having so much time sober, there's still that threat that could upturn my life and make everything come crashing down again. And that's a difficult thing to process. But again, you try to reinforce that with, just don't worry about that. But, seeing it in terms of face to face can just be disturbing. This happened with particular alacrity in the sense of during COVID, there was a few people that I knew in my community of recovery, the larger community of people that they had years of sober time, and then somewhere along the pandemic, they relapsed. And there's the pandemic affected people in a lot of ways. I mean, one of the bigger things was that it's not that it was just stressful, it's that it took away things people needed for their recovery. And it kind of wasn't too bad in my mind, because it was like, okay, the pandemic was a crazy, total X factor thing that, I mean, I don't, hope to God I don't, expect to go through something like that again in my lifetime. But there's still just this deep unsettling nature about somebody that, like, especially some people I had seen. Even I have been in tempting recovery for a very long time. I had been in AA for pretty frequently for like the last 10 years at least, just kind of in and out. I don't claim to have some perfect system of recovery that I mastered right away. I would say my experience can be helpful because I had failed so much. So I had gotten to know a lot of people that I had seen, where I would come back into the rooms and the same people would be there. I mean, there was at least some nice sense of familiarity where I'm just like, yeah, they're still doing good. I'm still screwing up, but at least they're still doing good. And then when I saw some of those people and found out that they had went back out, it was very troubling. And particularly, all addiction and alcoholism is super not great, but when it comes to long-term sobriety and clean time and relapse, when it comes to opioid users, it's pretty scary, because there's a high mortality rate that happens with the time spent away from the drug and then the introduction of it back into your system. There's a tolerancy that you have where, just like anything, whether it's drinking or crack or meth or what have you, you always kind of pick up where you left off. And when it comes to opiates, that can be particularly dangerous. There was two people I knew. I had both met in separate times of treatment. One that had 3 years of clean time, and he had relapsed. He was actually pretty. We were on a kind of a group thing where he was pretty open about it, and 2 months later he was dead. There was another one who had almost 2 years, and he had apparently after 2 weeks of his relapse he was dead. I mean, it can be particularly scary, and this brings me to a case example of what I'm talking about here with the late actor Philip Seymour Hoffman. Now, a lot of people were totally shocked when he died, because they didn't know about his struggles with addiction, and they didn't know for two reasons. One was he wasn't super open about it. I mean, he wasn't open about his personal life in general. He addressed it like once in like a 2006 interview. The other reason that they didn't know about his struggles with addiction was because at the time of his relapse, he had been 23 years clean and sober. And in mid to late 2013, he had relapsed. He had stated he'd relapsed. And he moved out of the home with his kid because he knew he needed to get himself under control. And then by early 2014, he was dead. These things can be hard to swallow, because again, there's this one idea of, yes, that it never ends. Yes, it's something you always need to address or be cognizant of. But the other mindset with a lot of other things in life, and it's totally natural to be like, yeah, but after a certain point, isn't it like taken care of? Like, is it still really a threat? And having to acknowledge that it is, at least for me, is is bothersome. But again, it's supposed to be reinforced with you don't worry about the future. But that's one of those things that's easier said than done. There was a one of the more like cited and larger studies that's concerning this type of stuff was alcoholic and addict studies are kind of difficult to do with some sort of strong validity, and especially longitudinal ones over many years. This was one over 8 years, and in a cruel twist of irony, it came out in 2014, the same year Philip Seymour Hoffman died. But it showed these numbers where people that were less than a year of sobriety relapsed at, I don't know, it was kind of a mixed percentage, but it wasn't great, which is like totally understandable. I mean, there was probably some people that had like 9 months of sobriety and then relapsed, but most of those were probably front loaded with like, a month or a week and then relapsing. Then it showed that people over a year of sobriety had about it was almost exactly like a 50% chance of having lifetime sobriety after that. And then after like 5 years or more, it was like an 85% chance that you would have a lifetime sobriety. And I had thought about this, and the 50-50 thing was kind of funny because you can look at it like a half full or half empty. And the cynical part of my mind, where I kind of found out as I had some longer time of sobriety that cynicism is like a natural disposition for me. I thought it was maybe because of my alcoholism, because drinking daily and being alcoholic will make you pretty cynical, but apparently it's just part of my mindset. So the cynical part immediately comes out and be like, it was so hard to get that year and beyond. Like, you're saying I only have a 50% chance now? Like, the way, with everything I've done? But another part of me kicked in, and this part was optimistic, and it wasn't fake optimism. It said that, hey, dude, think about it this way. For most of your drinking and using life, you thought truly that you had a 0% chance of staying sober. So, I mean, and with all things considered, this is pretty good. And, there's some people have this interesting way of looking at things. I don't know where this this thought kind of came from. I've seen it used in many different aspects of life, where everything's 50-50. On day one of sobriety, you just hit rock bottom, and now you just had your first day clean. And this idea that from that point on, you have a 50% chance of staying sober for the rest of your life, because you either will or you won't. And this is kind of the thought pattern that takes with everything. Like, will you die in a car accident? 50-50 chance, because you either will or you won't. And you can use that in some sort of positive measure. I mean, at some point you're like, will I win the lottery? Well, 50-50 chance, because you either will or you won't. And you're kind of like, okay, all right. I don't know how much consideration I'm going to give that. But I think when you can't really use numbers or statistics to predict your own fate. I mean, especially when it comes to recovery and sobriety. There are so many similarities between people's stories and people's experiences. And as cheesy as this may sound, you still have to remember that your own journey is unique. I mean, it is your own journey. I mean, you can't let what is expected of you to dictate what you think your outcome is going to be. Because if you did that, the truth is that most people won't find recovery. And so if you go off that mindset, I mean, you're not going to think it's going to end well. And I think in this case, you have to even ignore what is plausible. If you're going to get better, you have to ignore what is the more likely thing to happen. You can't think it's the more likely thing, and therefore it's pointless to try, or have a self-defeating attitude. You have to really think that it will be different this time. I mean, that's And that's the only way it's going to work. If you come in with already a negative attitude, you're going to be right back to drinking and using. You know, on one positive aspect of this, you know, I think about it this way, where I think, man, after a year, I still, it says I only have a 50-50 chance. Like, that doesn't seem fair. And the truth is, like a lot of things in alcoholism and addiction, you actually don't want what's fair. You know, I mean, think about it in this way. In terms of, like, I don't know how many DUIs you had. If you wanted what was fair, then at least, I don't know, in my case, I would have like a bajillion DUIs. Or if I got what was quote unquote fair, I would have it much worse off. I would probably most definitely not even be here. So I think about that in terms of, you know, let's say you had something that was fair. So let's say, okay, if you wanted some sort of like strong guarantee that you were not going to relapse, or at least maybe not a guarantee, but like something that's like in that 5% chance of relapsing, you know, like a 95% chance that you're going to stay sober for the rest of your life. Don't you think you would at least need to be in recovery as long as you were drinking or using? Because in my case, I drank and used for 15 years. So, I mean, it's kind of crazy of me to think that, you know, I've gone over a year. I should have this pretty much taken care of. It's like, dude, that's 1/15 of the time you actually spent actively using and drinking. Like, why would you think that like just everything would be totally changed? Which is a blessing, because for the most part, so much of my life has changed. I still have, you know, bad modes of thought. I still have some bad habits, but so much has changed. I mean, so much had changed for me in 3 months after like 15 years. So with all things considered, it's not a bad deal. And, you know, I will say this, again, to be honest and candid, when it comes to some sort of issue, you know, when you're dealing with some sort of scary thought or something that's kind of plaguing your mind, you know, the suggestion of like, just don't think about it, usually I'm just like, yeah, okay, screw you. That would be nice if I had a way to control, hey, just don't think about it. Oh, there we go. I never thought of it that way, ironically. But when it comes to, if you're faced with the reality that there are people that after many, many years of sobriety and clean time will relapse, if you ever fear for that for your own sake, really understand that you don't have to do that. You don't have to be sober for 5 years. You don't have to be sober for 10 years or 20 years, and you actually don't even have to be sober for the rest of your life. You just have to be sober for today. I mean, as cliche as that may sound, if you can really inculcate that reality into your mindset, it make things a lot easier. I mean, if you really embrace that idea that you don't have to do any of that shit, you just have to do today, it makes things a little bit easier. Again, if you embrace that with an open mind and open heart, it can quell some of those pessimistic and cynical thoughts. At least it has for me. So, anyways, if you're still struggling, my heart goes out to you. If you're trying to do this recovery thing, you're trying to stay clean or sober on your own terms or with the program, you know, best of luck to you. If you have a family member or friend that is suffering from this, you know, I have hope for them and for you. And if you're just watching this because you're interested in, thanks for watching.